The chair now recognizes Josh Wester, the chair of the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force, for a report.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Josh Wester. I'm a messenger from Cornerstone Baptist Church in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm honored to bring this report on behalf of the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force to the messengers to the 2024 annual meeting. Brothers and sisters, all year long, I have encouraged the members of this team sitting behind me not to grow weary in doing good. I bring to you right now the same exhortation. Let us, as Southern Baptists, not grow weary in doing good. For several years now, our convention has made great strides as we have sought to write a new story for Southern Baptists on the subject of sexual abuse. And we are writing a new story for Southern Baptists on this subject. So let us not grow weary in doing good. Instead, let us remember, as Southern Baptists, why we have done this in the first place. Southern Baptist family, we care about this issue because Jesus does. Jesus is the reason that we care about sexual abuse. Jesus cares about children. Jesus cares about the vulnerable. And it is Jesus who has called those who shepherd and serve his church to follow his lead in protecting and caring for those he entrusts to us. Jesus is the reason that we care about sexual abuse. For the very same reason, the book of James tells us that true religion is defined as caring for widows and orphans in their distress. Jesus tells us that those who would cause a little one to sin or stumble would be better off to tie a millstone around their necks and to cast themselves into the sea. Jesus cares for the vulnerable. He calls us to protect our children. That is what abuse reform is all about. It's often said that defining a problem clearly brings you halfway to solving it. When it comes to sexual abuse, the problem for the Southern Baptist Convention was never, and I hope you'll hear this clearly, the problem for the SBC was never that we had abuse occurring at wildly disproportionate rates or that our convention was shot through with abusers. Instead, the problem that we faced, the problem that this group behind me has dealt with for multiple years now, is grappling with the fact that the Southern Baptist Convention, having more than 10 million members and nearly 50,000 churches, as America's largest Protestant body, had no meaningful plan to help its churches prevent or respond to sexual abuse. That is the issue that we have been confronting. That is the problem that we have been working to solve. And so let me be very clear. In the SBC, abuse reform is about helping churches. Now, you may have been told otherwise. You may have heard it said that abuse reform is about policing your church or telling your church what to do, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Over the last couple years, our estimation is that we've helped roughly 50 churches that were seeking to navigate different instances of sexual abuse. Sometimes these were questions, sometimes they were grave concerns. In every case, we have found, as we have come alongside pastors and ministry leaders working with them, we have found that these pastors, rather than taking some kind of resistant posture, they were overwhelmingly committed to doing the right thing. And if I could tell you about the great irony, or as you may have been told that abuse reform is about someone coming to tell your church what to do, in these cases, with these pastors, with these ministry leaders, when they're facing the worst moments in their ministry, do you know what they say? Please tell us what to do. Please help us take the right steps to do the right things. As a task force, we're here to tell you that the churches in our convention, after interacting with these 50 churches and then with hundreds of pastors and ministry leaders over the last several years, We believe the churches of the Southern Baptist Convention are absolutely committed to doing the right things when it comes to sexual abuse. The problem is, in so many cases, our churches simply don't know where they're supposed to turn for help. That is unacceptable. We need to ensure that every church, every pastor, every leader in our convention always knows where they're supposed to look for the help that they need. So for 2 years, the exemplary team behind me, these are just exemplary servants, faithful Southern Baptists who have sacrificed hundreds of hours of their lives with long days, late nights, interrupted vacations, and endless meetings to serve you and the churches of our convention. They have made a sacrifice that you will never know, for which they have never received a dime. They have done it to serve Jesus. They have done it to serve our churches. And they have done it to see the Southern Baptist Convention become a safe place for every person. So in response to the mandate that was given to us by the messengers, here is what we have spent the last year chasing since you reauthorized the ARITF last year in New Orleans. We've worked on 3 key priorities, which we listed in our report that came out last week. I want to give them to you briefly. The first thing we have done is we have worked to expand the ministry toolkit, the free resources that are available at SBCabuseprevention.com. If you've not been to that website, I encourage you to go and check it out. You're going to hear more about the ministry toolkit in just a moment. The second thing that we have worked on is establishing the Ministry Check website that you called for as messengers at the annual meeting in Anaheim in 2022. The third priority we have worked on is creating a permanent home for abuse reform in the SBC. I'm going to walk you through each of those in just a moment. But before I get there, please take a look at your screens at this video that will tell you a little bit about the Essentials curriculum that is now available.
Hello, my name is Pastor John Nelson.
And I'm Pastor Brad Eubank.
And we both serve normative-sized churches within the SBC and also serve on the ARITF for the Southern Baptist Convention.
And both of us get phone calls, at least monthly, of churches that are struggling and knowing what to do. The reality is about abuse, statistics from 2021 tell us that over 147 kids were abused every single day on average in the United States.
And we want the local church to be the safest place for people to worship, hear the gospel, and be able to go out to the earth with the best move possible.
So we've created a resource that will help you and your church know how to prevent and respond well to situations of sexual abuse.
My name is Brad Eubank, and I'm a pastor and a survivor of clergy sex abuse. I've been blessed to be a Southern Baptist for 52 years, plus the 9 months before I was born. I was abused in my Southern Baptist church from the ages of 8 to 12, but I want you to know that I deeply love our SBC family. And I realized for the very first time in 2013, when my perpetrator went to court to be convicted for his crimes, that there was something that I could do to help our convention protect kids like me. I was hardly, though, the first to try. And sadly, many who came before me were also met with silence and rejection. This August will mark 10 years since I traveled to Nashville with another survivor and an expert in abuse prevention to meet with the then president and general counsel of the executive committee to plead with them that we must do something. Conferences, resources, or at least begin addressing this issue as a convention. But we were told there was really nothing that could be done due to our polity of autonomous churches. Instead of taking action, our requests were delayed and then buried in the hopes that we would just go away. For me today, this is a beautiful moment of God's redeeming grace as we are so excited to share with you. There is a new basic resource designed to help and walk alongside your church in order to help you protect and care for the most vulnerable.
Our churches should be the last place that someone experiences sexual abuse, and it should also be the first place that people can come to for help, hope, and healing. People in our churches, working with children, youth, and vulnerable adults, need to not only know how to prevent abuse, but also to recognize the signs and indicators of those who have experienced abuse and be able to respond appropriately. Essentials, Sexual Abuse Prevention and Response, has 5 basic but necessary steps: train, screen, protect, report, and care. This curriculum was developed in collaboration with numerous experts to provide churches with the help they need to prevent and respond well.
The implementation of Essentials is easy, and here it is right here, using the 5-5-5 method. Gather a team of 5 church leaders made up of those who lead or work with children, students, and vulnerable adults, the pastor, a deacon, and elders. Go through the 5 essentials in the order they are presented and complete each essential's next steps before moving on to the next one. We encourage you to allow roughly 5 months to complete all the next steps. It may take you longer, but that's okay. Once you enter the curriculum on the website, you'll be prompted with 5 questions assessment. At the end of the curriculum, you'll be prompted with those same questions with the goal to be able to answer yes to those 5 questions.
Each module of Essentials has 4 components: a training video, next steps, FAQs, and supplemental resources. Often we are overwhelmed with the information we are giving in a training. The beauty of the Essentials curriculum is found in the next steps portion. Once you've been given the information in each essential, you are given 3 to 4 next steps, laying out exactly what to do with the information you learn and how to implement it.
Each essential includes several pages of facts. We've gathered the most asked questions in around each essential and provide helpful answers that can help guide you in your decisions and to expand your knowledge. Finally, we've gathered numerous sample documents and supplements that you may use to customize for your church to help you with the implementation, including things such as a helpful chart of outside providers, sample screening documents, sample policies and procedures, a sample step-by-step response plan, and a guide for how to search for reputable counselors.
We have been committed to providing resources to all sizes of churches. No matter where your church is on this journey, Essentials is a beneficial resource for you. Whether you're just getting started or need to expand or enhance your current prevention and response efforts, this curriculum is available in 3 easy formats: a printed booklet, a USB drive, and online at sbcabuseprevention.com. We've also been committed to partnering and serving every state convention. To ensure as many churches as possible have access to this resource, all 41 state conventions will receive a shipment of curriculum of this resource for their churches. As always, there is no cost for this resource to conventions or churches.
Southern Baptist family, we truly believe this is a watershed moment in the life of the Southern Baptist Convention. And our hope and prayer and belief is that essential sexual abuse prevention and response will bring about the generational change we've prayed for. That churches of every size all across our convention would actually implement these 5 steps and thus see countless numbers of children, students, and vulnerable adults spared from the horror and trauma of sexual abuse. And when it does happen, respond well and be a safe and caring place for those who've experienced trauma of abuse, whether inside or outside the church.
Well, thank you, Brad and Chris. Church family, Southern Baptist family, I just want to say these guys have worked so incredibly hard on this curriculum. It is so incredibly impressive. I know that because I told this story to them, and I've shared it in other forms as well. I want to share it with you very briefly. I've been at my church as the pastor for just over a year. And on the very first day that I arrived there, I sat down with our children's minister, with our preschool director, and with our head of security. And we sat down and had a meeting on the afternoon of my very first day. I called it day 1, job 1, to make sure that we evaluated and understood our church's policies and procedures related to abuse prevention and response. We sat down and worked through, in the course of a conversation, we sat down and worked through several different things related to our policies and procedures, looking for gaps and trying to ensure that we had everything we needed to prevent abuse and respond appropriately should the unthinkable ever happen in our church. I created a checklist that we reviewed together as we were going through that meeting. And as I've shared, the only problem with that checklist was that I made it up myself. as the leader of the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force, it took me time, even at my own church, to evaluate what things do we need to do? What things do we absolutely have to do for certain to ensure that we are prepared to prevent and respond to abuse? Well, we have created the Essentials curriculum. This amazing team has put this resource in your hands for free. And it's not just a benefit to Southern Baptist. The online version is available to anyone. But to our Southern Baptist family, we've got the print copies. We've got it on USB drive. We wanted to make it as accessible as possible. And so right after this, there are copies sitting on our booth, but we have a tiny little booth over there. And if you'll meet us there, we would love to place these in your hands so that you can take them back to your church. My team at our church has already planned to go through this together and through these 5 modules over the rest of the summer. We were waiting for this moment to be able to launch Essentials, to place it not only in your hands, but in our hands as well. And I can tell you that this incredible team has put together this amazing free resource for you, and it's already been road tested, beta tested in real churches. It is absolutely ready to go. I could not be more grateful or thankful for their hard work. So please stop by our booth, pick up a copy of Essentials before you leave. The second priority that we have been working on is the Ministry Check website. And by way of reminder, Ministry Check is designed to be an online database of known sexual offenders connected to Southern Baptist churches. This is something that the messengers, the messengers, overwhelmingly voted for in 2022 and again in 2023. This has undoubtedly been the most difficult part of our work as a task force. Messengers have been coming to the annual meeting, calling for an online database of known sexual offenders since the early 2000s. In 2006, the SBC's legal counsel recommended to the executive committee that the EC consider establishing such a database to help churches keep track of dangerous people. In 2022, you, the messengers, affirmed a motion calling for the establishment of the Ministry Check website overwhelmingly. Why did you do that? We did that as Southern Baptists. I, being one of you who also raised one of those ballots, we did that as Southern Baptists because we recognize that a website like this is a vital tool in our hands to help keep dangerous people away from vulnerable people in our churches. I wish that standing before you today, I could say that the Ministry Check website is now online, but I cannot do that. What I can tell you is that even though we have encountered unbelievable obstacles in the course of trying to establish the Ministry Check website, we are right now closer than we have ever been. At this moment, there are roughly 100 names that have been vetted that are ready to be released publicly. But we are still working at this time with Dr. Orge and the executive committee to try to clear some remaining insurance hurdles before the Ministry Check website can go live. And if you'll permit me for just a moment, as you just heard him speak to you, Dr. Orge, since before he was elected, has been nothing but an ally to us in this cause. He has called from the day he was elected for robust abuse reform within the SBC, and he has worked every day to make that a reality. And so we are so grateful for him doing everything that he can to help us clear these final hurdles and remove these remaining roadblocks. God willing, once these insurance concerns have been overcome, we will launch Ministry Check, having for the very first time an online database of known sexual offenders who have been convicted in criminal court or who have been found liable in civil court for any Southern Baptist church to review to ensure that dangerous people that are eligible for Ministry Check are not able to prey upon the children and vulnerable people in your church. Here's the bottom line. Ministry Check is not a panacea. It will not suddenly make all of our churches safe. But we are confident that the moment that it is launched, it will suddenly make all of our churches safer by enabling us to recognize threats and to keep those who pose a danger to our most vulnerable people, the children in our churches. It will allow us to better protect and care for them. That is why we must remain resolved and keep working on this task. This brings me to my final priority. The thing that we've been chasing all year is finding a permanent home for abuse reform within the SBC. Listen, the people sitting up here on this stage with me are not only godly and talented and awesome, they are also exhausted. They are simply worn out. They have worn themselves out in service to you. In fact, many of them would tell you over the last 2 years that they have dedicated as much time to abuse reform as many of them have to their full-time jobs. I'm sure their employers are thrilled to hear that. We know as a task force that we are standing on the shoulders of 2 task forces that have come before us. We are so grateful for those who have served, for the survivors who have shared their stories with us, for the convention leaders, for the state execs, for the associational leaders, for the pastors, for all of the ministry partners that have worked with us, shared with us as we have pursued this. The other thing that everyone on this stage would tell you is that it has all been worth it. We have not been bored over the last 2 years as the ARITF. I wish that you could have been with us standing in the exhibit hall as we have talked to so many of you who have stopped by our booth. We have had survivors disclose stories of their abuse to us. We have had pastors come to us to seek counsel on how they could handle situations in their churches, even since we have been here. There has hardly been a week over the last 2 years where we have not interfaced with a pastor, with a state exec, with a DOM, with someone who's reaching out saying, hey, this thing just happened in our church. I'll share with you one more story briefly, which is the fact that as we were standing at the booth earlier today, a staff member at a church who has caught a large amount of attention about an abuse case that happened tragically in their church, came to us and said, I got the curriculum yesterday. I read it this morning, weeping, saying to myself, if I had this 6 months ago, it would have all gone differently. Our work has been worth it. I am so grateful and proud of this team. But here is the truth. This work is too large. Our convention's 50,000 churches have needs that are greater than what a task force is able to do or deliver for them. We need more help than a task force can give. We need a permanent home for abuse reform within the SBC. And so in just a moment, we are going to ask you, the messengers, to affirm 2 things. To affirm the 3 priorities that we have just put in front of you, and then to take these recommendations or take these priorities and refer them to the executive committee, because it's time for the task force to complete its work. It's time for the executive committee under Dr. Orge's leadership to take the next steps in establishing long-term permanent abuse reform within the SBC. We want to make sure that every church in the SBC has one place, one source that they can reach out to for help when they need it. No one wants the unthinkable to happen in their church. But if it ever does, they should not face it alone. No pastor should have to walk through an abuse case that they are not equipped to deal with without the help of experts and professionals who are there to walk with them and guide them every step of the way. So as a final word from our task force to you, the messengers, let me say this. At the end of the day, it was never a task force that was going to ensure that abuse reform gets done in the SBC. It was always you. It was always the messengers. Every time the opportunity to advance abuse reform has been put before you, the body, you, the messengers, you have raised your ballots. You have stood resolved that you wanted to see the SBC do the right things when it comes to abuse, and that it is simply not true that we have to choose between protecting our children and sending missionaries with the gospel to the nations. We can do both things at the same time. We are a gospel people. We can follow the way of Jesus. We can protect our children and care for those that Jesus has entrusted to us as we herald the gospel to the ends of the earth. With that, Mr. President, I move the messengers adopt recommendations 1 and 2 from the ARITF as printed in the Daily Bulletin.
Okay. All right, so we're going to clear the queue, and we are going to come to the question before you that is on the adoption of the recommendations from the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force as presented. Is there any discussion? Microphone 8A, would you please state your name, your church, and your motion?
Yes, my name is Jonathan Whitehead of Abundant Life Church in Lee's Summit, Missouri. I have an amendment to the first recommendation. I would move that the insert the following before the period in the first recommendation, but the convention does not require the use of any particular organization outside the convention entities or commissions to accomplish these objectives. I would ask if that's accepted as a friendly amendment, and if not, I'd like to speak to it if there's a second.
Is there a second? Okay. Give a moment to the committee to respond. Just a moment. Microphone 3A, would you please state your point of order or request?
Mr. President, Keith Meyer, a messenger from Harvest Baptist Church. I was attempting to ask a question.
Okay, all right. Stay there.
We'd like to ask for clarification on the amendment.
So they were asking if you took the amendment as a friendly amendment.
Mm-hmm. Well, the question is, Brother John, you said does not require. If you mean does not require, we agree with you. We don't know that any specific thing is required. If you're talking about precluding something, we'll give you a different response.
Okay. So we're going to go with the wording of the amendment, which was does not require.
Then we are perfectly acceptable.
Okay. Is there any objection to adopting this amendment? Seeing none, the amendment is adopted. Okay, let's go back to microphone 3A.
Do you want me to tell you who I am again?
No, it's Keith Meyer. We're glad you're there. Go ahead and tell us what you need.
It's appropriate to ask Josh a question.
It is appropriate for you to ask Josh a question.
Josh, thank you for your work. After the last convention, it was our understanding your task force had a clear mandate, millions of dollars with which to carry it out, and complete independence so that you could serve the will of the messengers. To be honest, what you've given us today is not the completion of everything that we asked you for. Why is it, with those level resources, that you were not able to accomplish everything that the messengers asked you for, including a database that includes 4 categories? And if the problem has anything to do with insurance or money, please illuminate us.
Okay.
Keith, thank you so much for the question. I'll do my best to answer it. So sitting in the room as a fellow messenger along with all of you, I heard a number of motions for task forces. And as one person who has been leading a task force for the last 10 months, I am just speaking very forthrightly here. Task forces have some power. They apparently have very limited power when it comes to doing things in the SBC. And I say that carefully because what you would assume if you were a messenger sitting out there is that you appoint a task force so that it can act with some measure of independence. But the reality is within our system, any task force is going to be relatively at the mercy of the various apparatus that makes up the SBC. And so for our funding, you mentioned the amount of $4 million. The original motion, if you go back to what was called for in 2022, the request was that the send relief funds that were allocated for abuse reform would be given to the executive committee to hold in trust for the ARITF and the implementation of abuse reform, and that from that, the funds, it literally said it in the motion, would not be withheld. That is not exactly what happened. Instead of that, we were in a situation where the funds were never given to the executive committee, and our task force had to go through a 2-step process of approval for any given set of expenses. That, on top of the fact that it required a substantial amount of outside counsel to do the outside counsel and contracting power to do some of the things that we were called to do. Our report basically reflects the fact that we took this work as far as we were allowed to take it.
Okay. So the time for this item has expired. We're going to recognize Hayden Ratner from the Committee on Order of Business for a motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Order of Business would like to move to extend this for another 5 minutes.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. Is there any objection? Okay, the time is extended 5 minutes. The microphone 1A, would you state your name, your church, and you wish to speak for the motion, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Rich Starnes. I am pastor and messenger from North Shore Baptist Church in Rocky Mount, Missouri. First of all, I think that this convention should express its unbelievable gratitude to all of the members of the task force. As someone who's been both a Southern Baptist and involved in the prosecution of sex crimes for the last quarter century of my life, I do know the stakes that are involved in this and the importance of not only legally but spiritually taking care of this issue. So I thank you for the recommendations that you brought. I think we should support them because, as you have expressed today, this is the best that you believe that you can do under the current circumstances, as hard as they may be. Mike, I do have a question, if I may ask, and that relates to the initial need for the formation of ARC, and that this would be, that ministry check would run through an independent organization, and then what seems to be, near the conclusion of the report, that the executive committee is actually looking for a way to incorporate it into their work. One, why did the task force change its mind about the need for an independent organization? And two, with the statements that ARC was fully insured and ready to go, what is the holdup with that related to insurance issues?
Rich, thank you so much for the question. I'll do my best to try to give you a very brief and concise answer. The truth is, if you went to poll the ARITF and ask them about their experience, one of the things they would tell you is we have tried to be responsive to the concerns of SBC leaders throughout this process. We always, as a task force, believed that abuse reform was going to be best served within the SBC because by being internal to the SBC long term, it was going to hold the trust of the churches at the SBC. I was called to an emergency meeting on January 3rd, and I flew 2 days after the new year to Dallas to meet with Dr. Barber, to meet with the interim president of the executive committee, the chairman of the board, and legal counsel to discuss what was a very serious set of insurance concerns that had clearer implications or ramifications for abuse reform. And at that time, it was basically made clear to us that there was no future. This is January 3rd. There was no future for robust abuse reform within the SBC. In other words, maybe we could do some things inside the SBC, but that was undefined and certainly not robust. So we were basically told, you can pump the brakes and stop working toward abuse reform, or you can find another way. What's another way? The only thing that all of these people putting their heads together could come up with was that there's gonna have to be some means outside of the convention to help get this done. That is where the idea for ARC, the Abuse Response Commission, came from. It was basically this task force saying, if there's no other way to do something good, to move the ball forward on behalf of Southern Baptists, we will, members of the task force, take this on and try to do our best so that there is something. Because the number one question we have been asked since we got here was, what happens when you're gone? We were trying to make sure there was something available to help our churches. When Dr. Orge was elected, he has worked very, very hard to reopen the pathways to be able to ensure that robust abuse reform can happen inside the SBC. And so our task force has gladly said our desire all along so that we could enjoy the trust of the churches was to do this within the SBC. And so the plan for that, the recommendation here is to allow the executive committee to take the blueprints we have given and to implement abuse reform that is permanent and lasting. At this time, there is still no option because of the insurance concerns to do the database ministry check within the SBC. And so we do have ministry check that is established and ready to go, at least in these two categories right now. And we can continue to work with the executive committee to try to answer those questions or deal with any of those problems as we move forward here. What we're trying to do in asking you, and I appreciate you supporting the recommendations, we're asking the messengers to give Dr. Orge and the executive committee the chance to take these next steps.
Microphone 1A, can you state your name, your church, and your point of order?
Antioch Southern Baptist Church, Harrisonville, Missouri.
Can you give us that name one more time because the microphone was not on?
Dean Schooler.
Thank you.
And my point of order is whether the vote is going to be on one resolution or on both resolutions at the same time?
That's a point of parliamentary inquiry, and the question before the messengers is on both resolutions.
Thank you.
Okay. The time for this item has expired. And so now we will proceed to the question. The question before you is on the adoption of the resolutions or the recommendations from the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force. As many of you as are in favor of the adoption of these recommendations, would you indicate by lifting your ballots? Thank you. You may lower them. As many as are opposed, would you indicate by lifting your ballots? Thank you. You may lower them. Those in favor have it, and the motion carries. At this time, I'd like to call for anyone who's planning to make a nomination for registration secretary to please come to the parliamentarian desk down here at the front. Anyone seeking to nominate someone for registration secretary?